Hello, people. Andrew here, talking about comics from a reader, collector, speculator, investor point of view, in that order of importance to myself. And today I'm talking about Hellboy. And actually, I'm going to start the Hellboy, the Mignola universe, Mignola verse, because Hellboy is the main title, the one that started it all off, but there are a lot of other books that are affiliated and connected to this particular book, the BPRD, Abe Sapien, even some of the stuff like Lobster Johnson. So we'll get into how we're going to approach this. So Hellboy, I knew of Hellboy, and in the winter of 2021, I bought a collection called the White Collection, a really big collection, and in that collection were about 250 to 300 books. Devoted to Hellboy and the Mignola verse. So I decided I would read them because I read everything that I buy, and I thought, at worst, if I don't like it, I know there's a big fan base for Hellboy. I could probably sell off every single one of those books at $1 a piece, and be making double my money on that. So but I read it. I read all of them, and I enjoyed it. However, I had started off the wrong way. I had started off alphabetically. What do I know? I don't know. I didn't know, as I said, very little about Hellboy, so I started off with Abe Sapien. And the first book from that was Drums of the Dead, and that was okay because it was sort of like a one-off little horror story. But then it got into a whole whack of stories that were connected to a much later period of time with the BPRD. And so I didn't quite understand what was going on. It was only when I did some more research and I realized that this is like one large continuing story with the BPRD. Hellboy has some one offs. It was very much, he's part of that, but he also has a lot of one off adventures as well. But to read the Abe Sapien as your first introduction to this Mignolaverse, that was a big mistake. And I realized that, and as I said, as I continued reading, and I said, well, once I finished reading all this, I'm going to reread the whole thing in order. And now, here's the other thing when it comes down to the order. What is the order? There are websites out there that actually debate and discuss what is the reading order for the Hellboy and the Mignola verse. Is it based on publishing dates, like when the book was published? Or are we going to take a look at it sequentially as far as history is concerned? Because a number of books written about Hellboy's earlier years didn't get written for about 10 or 12 years after the first appearance of Hellboy. And some of the other characters, Lobster Johnson and even Baltimore, they happen much earlier than this first appearance of Hellboy in his own book. So, what's the reading order? So, I'm going to do the reading order based on publication date, year of publication. And then we'll go through the whole collection that way. The other interesting thing about the collection is that publishing it wasn't published like a standard comic book. Like if you have a title, say even Amazing Spider-Man, every month you're going to get an Amazing Spider-Man book. And this will go on and go on, and so etc. But for Hellboy, that wasn't the case. There was the first series of Hellboy called Seed of Destruction, and then there wasn't another Hellboy book until next year. It wasn't a monthly release, and this is true with most of the books up until later on in the 2000s, when it seemed to be whatever struck Mike Mignola at the time. Says, yes, I have a Hellboy story I'd like to tell, so I'm going to tell this Hellboy story. And then, maybe he's going to then tell a Lobster Johnson story later on in that year. And we're not going to see Lobster Johnson again for another year or maybe a year and a half. And Hellboy, so it was all sporadic as far as publishing is concerned. Now, the problem with publishing, not problem, but the numbering wasn't on the outside of the book. It was on the inside cover for a lot of these titles. They went to outside numbering again much later on, and I can imagine the inside numbering was just for the collector who wanted to see everything in sequence. But if you're a new reader and you're coming to the table and you're looking at the books and you see Hellboy number 7, you think, well, I need to get issues 1 through 6 to fully find out what that story is about. But you don't, because they were all broken down for the most part into story blocks, and it would be like 1 of 4. As of Seed of Destruction was a 4-part story, and then there would be another story beyond that that would be its own 4-part story, or whatever it was, 2-part. And they didn't necessarily flow from one to the other, although obviously if you read all of it you'll get more from it, but you didn't have to. So numbering was very different different for Hellboy and for a lot of the books because, as I say, it was not on the front cover. So, how did Hellboy begin, and what's it really about? Well, Hellboy is this creature that was summoned, I suppose, from hell in an experiment in 1944. Two different locations. In the film, it's interesting because in the film it's at the same location, but and it does make for a more dramatic effect here. But in the book itself, it was two different locations. You have this guy who's looks an awful lot and sounds a lot and has a lot of history of Rasputin, but he's not actually called Rasputin in the Seed of Destruction. Anyways, he's trying to summon some great power, and what happens is that he summons this little Hellboy. Professor Trevor Broom sees him and gives him the name Hellboy when he arrives at different locations, because and then he adopts the kid, and we have the story of Hellboy, who is this creature from hell, being adopted by a human and raised as such, and he goes on all these adventures, tackling the mysterious, the horrific, the things that go bump in the night, dealing with folklore and what have you. And it's his adventures. That's the basic premise. It does evolve into something more than that, but that's where we start with Hellboy. So Hellboy was first created in 1993. He was an illustration for a pamphlet, and I don't have any of the very early issues of Hellboy, but the nice thing about the collection that I bought is that obviously the previous owner really liked Hellboy, so he went back and bought the trade paperbacks to fill in the gaps leading into his first purchase of a Hellboy book or into that universe, which was probably about 1998, 1997, 98. So 93 is when you first see Hellboy, and he's an illustration for a pamphlet. So, I don't want too much glare on there. You can see it up here. That's the original illustration of Hellboy. It doesn't look like the Hellboy that we know now, but on his belt buckle is the word Hellboy. And Mike Mignola liked that name, and so he decided to work and develop that character. And you can see the progression of the character until he gets to be the Hellboy that we know today. He then went on. Hellboy then showed up in San Diego Comic Con Comics #2. It was a 4-page story. It was written by John Byrne, and it featured Hellboy facing off against a giant monster dog creature. So it was sort of like a creature of the week feature for 4 pages of him having a throwdown with this dog creature, which may or may not have been Anubis. And that was his first official appearance. He shows up in color and in his first nationwide magazine in a book called Next-Men, which was written by John Byrne, Next-Men #21. John Byrne did the writing of that, and Mike Mignola provided the artwork for the Hellboy parts. Now, I'm told that there's a cameo of Hellboy in Next-Men #14 on a poster on one of the scenes in one of the panels. I don't know that for a fact because I don't have Next-Men #14, but I am definitely going to be on the lookout for that one and pick it up in a dollar bin or so when I do find it. His first official appearance, his first appearance under the Hellboy banner was in this 4-part book called Seed of Destruction. So, now, as far as, as speculation investment, I will talk right now about these books here, which I don't have any of those books. But this is where you're going to find the majority of your spec and investment. So the one, the San Diego Comic Con #2, that's the first appearance of Hellboy, and surprisingly, a mid-grade will cost you about $500 to $600. I haven't seen one out in the wild, and that's where I do my shopping, is out out in the wild. But and I can imagine that if somebody actually has one at a convention, that they'll charge more than $500 or $600, depending on the condition. But even at that, I still think it's a relatively low price and a good investment for a very significant character to the whole comic book pantheon. He's been in 3 movies. I don't think he's going away anytime soon. He's an interesting character, and there's interesting stories being told. It just seems that that's a very low price for the first appearance, and it's a low print run as well. His second appearance, the X-Men 21, I was just at a convention and somebody had 2 copies of it. One was graded at a 9.2 for 200, and another was not graded, but he considered it to be in better shape than the other one for 170. I was considering that, but I ended up buying Fantastic Four number 67 instead. So I don't have that. But again, that one I think is another good, solid investment. The first color Hellboy and the first nationwide magazine in the X-Men book 21. And then his first appearance with his first banner, calling it a Hellboy, would be Seed of Destruction #1, which again I can consider to be a good spec investment book. It's not as going to be as expensive as the other ones, but as I say, it's the first book that has the title Hellboy in his first book. Issue #2 might be a consideration as well because it's the first appearance of Abe Sapien and Liz Sherman. So that is where your bulk of your investment in Spalk is, just in those first 4 books. There are other books throughout the series that may merit a little bit more. It could be because of the artist. I know Richard Corbin does some artwork, and we'll get to that eventually. And then there's the first appearance of characters like Lobster Johnson, Baltimore, etc., that show up throughout the book, and minor keys at best. But pretty much that's it for your spec and investment on the beginning of the Hellboy stuff. Just before I go on, I will talk a little bit about Mike Mignola's artwork. I really like his artwork, and there are people that collect stuff just for his artwork, so this falls into that for those collectors. He has a sort of a simpler outline design. It's not heavy on the details. But he captures the images and the structure. Sometimes there's a little bit of distortion in the characters or exaggeration, and he does have some details. You can see that even in this cover here, there's a certain amount of details, but where one of his big strengths is in the shadows and in the shading. That's what gives this book its movement, its emotion, and you can see it in here. And one of the things that I do like, and it progresses, is it's in the characters, but it's also in the backgrounds. You'll notice up top here that there's a sort of this Aztec motif, and as we move forward, a lot of these places take place in older buildings from times centuries ago, with gargoyles and strange faces and graveyards, and they all have sort of an eerie look to begin with, and then with his shading, it's even that much more creepier. Which adds to that kind of horrific element. And his panel structure is pretty interesting too. He doesn't rely on a particular panel structure. It's just what is necessary to tell this part of the story. Sometimes it's a full splash page. Sometimes it's broken panels as somebody's falling through or down. You have large panels, and his perspective changes within those panels. You have close-ups, you have far shots, you have establishing shots. Very interesting artwork to look at, regardless of the story. So I'm already there as saying, yes, it's reading just for the artwork. Okay, so Seed of Destruction is the first story arc with Hellboy. And what's it about? As I say, it's in this book here, which is nice. This is the first of the trade paperbacks. 4 issues. So it is this... I'm not going to call it the origin of Hellboy, but it's where he arrives. This Rasputin type character is trying to release or summon something to help release 7 ancient entities, demigods, gods, demons, whatever. But when they arrive on Earth, they're going to destroy the Earth, they're going to control the Earth, they're going to eat the people, whatever it is they're going to do, but they are going to command and control the Earth. And he's going to be on their side because he's the one that's going to bring them back to the Earth, so that they can be freed of their cosmic prison, another dimension, another plane. So he's working to find a way to get these things freed and released. And the process, and this is happening during World War II, is supported by the Nazis trying to get that kind of mysticism behind them. And as I say, it releases Hellboy, comes to Earth at a different location in, Trevor Broom's collective. He's got a group of people with him, and this is where we begin. But the story actually begins. It gives you a little bit about that, throughout the story, but Hellboy has come to visit again with his dad, Trevor Broom, and this is about 50 years after this initial event that they're talking about here. Broom's an old man by now. He's concerned about, an event that happened years ago and how it's somewhat manifesting now. And in the process of the visitation, Hellboy, Broom is assaulted by this frogman, and the frogman kills him. So right there in front of Hellboy, he sees his dad die to the frogman. Hellboy has he has anger issues, but I'd be angry too, and takes on the frogman, who seems to be a pretty formidable foe just for the one frogman, and then begins the investigation with whatever clues are left behind is to find out why this frogman is here and what. How can he be stopped, and who's controlling him, and who sent him? So he sets off with Abe Sapien and Liz Sherman, as I say, which would show up in issue number 2, to find out the mystery and put an end to the frogman threat. And here we get into the whole idea with Rasputin making a return. I'll call him Rasputin. And we get into that whole cosmic horror thing that's happening here. I did not know that Hellboy was going to be such a cosmic horror type of book, and it isn't entirely. It reminds me a little bit of the sort of the X-Files and Supernatural, where there's an overarching theme. Say in Supernatural, it's the angels versus demons war, for example, and in the X-Files, it's the pursuit of alien intelligence or whatever. But then there's also the monster of the week story that goes along, interspersed in here. And that's sort of what Hellboy does. Hellboy, not so much BPRD, but Hellboy does that sort of thing where it does have this big cosmic Cthulhu-like, H.P. Lovecraft-like story going on, but then there are these monster of the week stories as well. But we start off right away with, as I say, like a Cthulhu-style cosmic horror. And if you're not interested in that kind of cosmic horror, I don't know that you would really appreciate this book. There is other horrific elements about it, and sometimes it's just the beastie thing. The frogmen are interesting, and what they do and who they are. The background behind them is kind of interesting. So I do like that as well, but it is a very cosmic horror type of story. And it comes to a resolution after 4 issues, up to the 4th issue, but not necessarily the end of the war. So this particular battle is won, but the war still continues. Here's just a panel from it, which again shows some of the style of Mike Mignola, about perspectives and shading. That's Hellboy. I can't get the words there. Hellboy, confronting Rasputin. You got a close-up, you got a distance, and his style with a lot of the shading and the Aztec motifs up near the top. So that was Seed of Destruction, in an interesting release. And that was released, in 1993, I think it was? Seed of Destruction. Oh, no, sorry, 1994. Okay, so then, included in 1994 again, there's not another Hellboy book, but Hellboy does make an appearance in Dark Horse Presents, and there's a story called The Wolves of August. Now, again, I don't have these Dark Horse books, but again, I was fortunate enough that there was these trade paperbacks, and in this trade paperback is the collected version of The Wolves of August. One of the things I liked about The Wolves of August was I found that the introduction, the setup, more interesting than the finale. The finale was fine, but I'm getting the idea, and from some of the stories that I've read, is that Mike Mignola actually must have a small library or whatever of folklore, mythology, and he digs into these books and these stories to drag out some concepts and stories, and that inspires him to tell this tale. So though Wolves of St. August, it's not based on a truth, it is got some folklore behind it, and I found that the folklore and the story about how this town became what it was very interesting. And in the end, Hellboy, journeys to the town. Now, I'm going to give a little bit of a spoiler here, just because this is where I think there could be a little bit more of a horrific element added into this book, and that is that. The wolves of St. August, they're werewolves. So it's a throwdown with a werewolf by the end of it. But the werewolves are in this town, but they're not just werewolves; they're ghost werewolves. And I think there has been interesting if there's been 2 or 3 pages perhaps of one of the townspeople, settling down for the night, a little bit nervous, maybe hearing some of the howling, but prepared, knowing about the werewolves and maybe having some silver bullets or whatever else he needs to have in his house to offer some degree of protection, only to have that protection negated because these are ghost werewolves that can still do the damage of a werewolf, but they're in ghostly form. So there would be a terror of I'm prepared, but ultimately I'm unprepared, and the terror that might come from that. So that's what it is. It's a werewolf story. It's a sort of monster, but I really liked the setup to it and the artwork again with these old buildings and structures, and has that sort of eerie, sort of gloomy look to it. Yeah, there was some genuinely horrific moments in it and horrific ideas. I really liked The Wolves of St. August, and that was again in 1994 from Dark Horse Presents. Then we go into 1995. We moved in 1995, and there was a couple of books going on in 1995. One of them was the Chained Coffin, which ran again in Dark Horse Presents from 100 to 102. That's included in this series as well, and I don't have those Dark Horse books. But the Chained Coffin, again, it's one of the things about that which made me realize, moving forward, is that, yeah, religion is going to play a part in this. I mean, there was religion in the Wolves of St. August, but it seemed to strike a little bit, have a little greater resonance, I suppose, with the chained coffin, because he's a creature that seemingly came from hell, so that means we're going to be dealing with things like demons, and we're going to be dealing with possibly angels and that sort of thing, and so that's going to play a role in some of these stories, and it does in the Chained Coffin. And the Chained Coffin, again, it's like another thing about the Chained Coffin is, yeah, Hellboy is going to go in and face these things, but he's not always going to win. It's not always going to be the resolution that he wants. And so then he picks up himself and then carries on because he's lost this particular battle. The other story that's in here from that time period, from 1995, is The Corpse. The Corpse is often regarded as one of the best single stories of Mike Mignola and Hellboy. It was written for Capital City Advance Comics Catalog, issues 75 to 82. He was asked to do a Hellboy piece, 2 pages per issue, and he said, "What can I do in 2 pages?" So again, he went to his folklore and looked up some books and some information. So he had this story where something different would happen every 2 pages. And basically, the corpses, there's a lot going on in the corpse, and it's all a lot of fun. I mean, part of his world, part of Hellboy's world is going to involve fey creatures, like sprites and pixies and things like that, and their negative counterparts as well, brownies and buck-ons and whatever else are on the negative side, goblins and bogarts. And so it's interesting that he runs into this sort of collection of nastier fate, but they don't necessarily consider themselves evil. They've got their own code that they live by, and they do things for their own reasons. So they've come along and they've stolen somebody's child, and that whole interaction between the changeling and Hellboy is a lot of fun. And then Hellboy confronts some of these other evil fey type of thing, and they strike a deal as to how things are going to get done, and he's got to find a way to bury this corpse that he carries around that's clinging to him as he takes him to various cemeteries, trying to find a place to bury the corpse before sunup. And there are other characters that creep in. There's the fact that Hellboy is always I mean, the ghosts and undead are just part of his natural life, and he encounters them without, oh well, here's a ghosty over here. I'll talk to this guy here, and I'll talk to that guy there. It's a really fun read, and it really does something new happens every 2 pages, and the story, as I say, it's a lot of fun. Even if you're not going to be a Hellboy reader, even if you find that cosmic horror stuff is just not in your wheelhouse, I do recommend that regardless of anything else that you do read The Corpse. It's a lot of fun. The artwork is great by Mike Mignola. You can't go wrong with The Corpse. So overall, and I'll stop here, there are other stories within here, and I'll come back to that on the next video, because as I say, I'm going to try and do this year by year. So this is 94 and 95. Yes, 94 and 95, 1994 and 1995. So obviously, from what is it worth a read? Yeah, absolutely. For me, it's absolutely worth a read. It's a good series to pick up, a good place to start. You get that cosmic horror of an overarching theme there, like a Cthulhu styles type of thing happening, and then you've got these monster of the week stories, and then you get all of this interesting folklore that's thrown in there. Some of it's going to be true, and some of it's not, but it certainly develops and gives believe it or not, I mean, for a world that's full of fantasy and mystery and stuff, it grounds the stories with this folklore that's attached to that. And I do love the artwork, especially, and it improves as time goes on. As I said, the buildings, the shadowing, the buildings, the sense of place, the eeriness of the places that he investigates. It's just, I enjoy it very much. Is it horror? No, it's not exactly, because Hellboy's a pretty good guide through this world. He's a pretty tough guy and can take a lot of hard knocks. So we're supported by him as he goes through. But there are other characters surrounding him that don't fare quite as well because they're not Hellboy. So yeah, there is that horror element, but it's also sort of an adventure, a little bit of that fantasy stuff, even if it's a little darker fantasy. And again, I will mention the artwork one more time and say that I really like the artwork. As far as collectors are concerned, those that want Mike Mignola's material, those that collect Hellboy, they'll be in here. And as time goes on, different artists do their take on Hellboy. Even in this first one here, at the back of this, there's a number of pinups by various artists showcasing, their talents and their interpretations of Hellboy. So that's in the first book, Seed of Destruction. But there are other books throughout the run of Hellboy that have different artists as well that are worth taking a note. We'll get to those too for the collector. So yeah, overall, I really enjoy Hellboy. I am going to be looking forward to reading the entire thing again that I have in publication order. And then I'll bring those reviews to you. So that's it for now. So, be good to yourself and be good to others. We'll talk again soon.